there was one day we were on set and we were establishing post snake fight, the overalls, and we were in Peru. So it was like the first week of shooting, and we were aging it, but we didn't know like how dirty she was going to get in the snake fight.
Oh
And we
yeah.
brought you up to set, and Damien was like, no, it's not quite dirty enough. And Kelly, who's the fabulous set costumer, Kelly Porter, shout out, and we were pouncing and dusting, and Damien was like, it wasn't enough, and the sun was starting to set, and like, oh my gosh, we're gonna lose the light. And you said, here, let me do this, and you went on the ground and you rolled and you stood up and kind of patted it out, and he was like, perfect. And I was like, I love you so much right now.
I remember that.
That's incredible.
Hi everyone, I'm Margot Robbie and welcome to The Process. I am joined today by the incredible costume designer from Paramount Pictures, Babylon, our film that's about to come out, Mary Zophres. Welcome, Mary.
So nice to be here. Thank you for doing this, Margot. It's lovely to see you.
You too, I miss you.
I miss you too. I really miss you. I've been gushing about you. I'm in Atlanta. Oh,
I was about to say, you look like you're on a truck somewhere on set.
I am. I'm on the costume truck on set in Atlanta, and it's freezing here, and it's been pouring down rain, and my hair is a mess. So what are you gonna do? But
you look gorgeous. Don't worry.
No,
well, actually, this is a great place to start the conversation. Do you feel like you spend most of your life on a costume truck somewhere in some different city? And if yes, is that like conducive to creation? Like, you know, being in such a small confined space with things all around you, and you have to be so creative and do so much work on such a large scale. Like, I think something people don't really necessarily know or appreciate about film sets is how often people are crammed into tiny spaces, whether it's, you know, sound mixers or something like hiding under here, or whoever or whatever, dialect coaches crouched under a table, costume designers creating entire worlds in the back of trucks. How do you find that?
As most of the time, I'm actually not in this confined space, but I find myself in a confined space of an office. We were prepping in the Edith Head building on the Paramount lot, which all those little rooms, I don't know if you remember, and that we just wallpapered the walls with all the research that we had. And that is conducive to me. Like, that feels like home, is like it's a creative space for me to be in the production office. The costume truck, not so much, because by the time it gets here, it's already like settled. Like, it's been fit, it's been tailored. And because I'm a designer, I don't like to wait to the last minute. I like to know what everybody's wearing, because to me it's like painting a painting. And so you start with the lead, or number one and two on the call sheet, and then you feather out. And so I like, so it's not so much the costume truck, but it is the costume office, which is often like, very few square feet, like small square footage, tiny. Yeah. And but
crammed
yeah,
with people.
But it's also crammed with, like, I could have piles of fabric on my desk and pictures all over the wall, and that every once in a while I have to clear everything off and start from scratch. But all of those piles, like, they all mean something to me. I'm like, that's Eleanor's pile, that's Nellie's pile, and then eventually it gets organized, and like, so you can kind of breathe. But that I kind of like, and that is it's like a gypsy. And that part, you're right. It's just, for me, it's not on a truck. It's usually in the whatever office they have us set up, and I always try to get a little bit of natural light, which you can't get in a costume truck, and or maybe the front door. But you're right about the weird spaces that people find themselves creating, like huge visual extravaganzas, but you're in a very unglamorous place while you're doing it. And yeah, if you've been doing it since you started, then yeah, that's the way you prep on a film. And so it seems like second nature to me.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I just feel like there's been a few times where I've seen like a fashion designer, prepping for a runway show or something. And then I think like, wow, this world is so different to the movie set world. We literally work on construction sites, essentially, that move around every few days. Like, it's just such a different world.
Next part. Miss Moore will come in. She's taking prostitution back in the day, so when you see her, you cry in shame. I need big tears. Big, you got it? Is that gum? Kidding me? What's wrong with you?
5-minute warning for Miss Moore! going on here?
Ruler bar, look at Miss Moore. And tears. Okay, glycerin.
We seem to be out.
What? You haven't used any.
Porky thought it was lube.
You thought it was lube?
Yes.
She can't cry. She's just some random whore from Wallach's house. Cut.
Hiya, I'm Nellie Leroy. So we going again?
I told you this when we met, but I love your episode on the Team Deacons podcast. And I felt like I learned so much. And I obviously was already a fan of yours because you've done so many amazing movies and you've worked with like some of my favorite directors. So I was quite keen to listen to your episode on the Team Deacons podcast. But for anyone who might be listening to this and might not have listened to that, I was so fascinated by how you got into this industry and how you kind of didn't have like a traditional training kind of, you know, there wasn't, and I think a lot of people ultimately say that, like their way into, someone's here, their way into the industry might be from any different way, and how you get there with or without formal training, the point is you get there. So I was wondering if you would share that story again about just how you got started with your first couple of gigs.
Yeah, I didn't know that you could work in the film business until I was a senior in college, and I was an art history and an art major. I was in a film class, but I took the film class because I loved film, but I wasn't thinking that I would end up being in the film industry. By the fourth quarter, we were making our own films, and so you could take turns, and you would be an actor in one, and you were doing the sets and costumes in another, and you were doing the cinematography in another. And the me being in front of the camera was a disaster. Like that, I did not feel like I found my space at all. I had to get high to go in front of the camera. Like now I'm better with it, but I was so nervous, and it was like all my friends, it was so stupid. But anyway, I really loved being behind the camera. It was rough going in it was like in the 80s, late 80s. And to get a job in the film business, you kind of had to work for free. And my first job was as a parking PA. And the parking PA was like, let me introduce you to somebody on this film set. And so I worked a couple of nights, like overnight, as a parking PA. And he introduced me. It was a film that was in New York for like 2 weeks. He introduced me to the costume crew. And I worked for them as a PA. And then my friend who was doing Born on the 4th of July said, the costume designer needs a PA. I showed up and she gave me a task to do. And I was so comfortable, and she had a big pile of clothes, and I remember it was like 50s, 60s, and 70s, and I knew what they were, the eras were, because as a rebellion against my parents, I started shopping in thrift stores and like started learning about the history of 20th century clothes. And I think with my art history background, I knew a lot about the history of clothes just by studying painting. And so it all clicked. And like in the first day I was there, I was like, oh my God, I felt like I was home. And the anxiety of not knowing what I was going to do with my life, I was like, oh, well, I'll be a costume designer. And the costume designer hired me, got me into the union, and I was an assistant costume designer with her. And then I worked with Richard Hornung, who was like, Judy was like my undergrad, Richard was like my graduate school. And after I did the Hudsucker Proxy with him, I was the assistant costume designer. I was like, oh, I'm ready. And then Judy actually was the one who recommended me for my first design job. And I've been designing ever since. And I feel like I'm still learning. I've been doing it for 25 years, probably close to third. I don't know how, anyway, definitely 25 years. And I learned something new on every show. And just the whole picture, it's like the hair and the makeup and I don't have anything to do with the sets, but I love to work in constant communication with the production designer and the cinematographer. And like, that was what was so great about Babylon. We were working fast and furious, but we were all like trading information and knowledge, and like, this is what this set looks like, and this is what she's wearing. And like Flo and I were constantly communicating through text all the time. And it was the hardest movie I ever did, but it was the one of I think probably the most gratifying movies I've ever done. And on crutches.
I
remember that.
Oh my God, that's right. You were on crutches the whole time.
I know.
Not the whole time. It was like pretty soon after we started, though.
Yeah, when we started our camera test. But anyway, I don't want to. I'm totally fine now. But yeah, I don't think that's what made it so hard. I think it would have been hard regardless, right? Because it It
Oh
was a
man,
doozy, right?
it was a doozy. It was definitely, yeah, the hardest job. I said that after week one. I said, this is the hardest I've ever worked. And I only know hard work. That's like what I'm addicted to is hard work. And Babylon was just on a different scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
Costume trucks not conducive with crutches. I'm amazed
Oh,
that
right.
you didn't end up with 2 casts on your legs. But okay, so let's go back to that for a second. You mentioned Flo and like just the incredible HODs that we worked with. And I think it's so evident when people are working in tandem together. Like if everyone's working towards the same thing, it just feels right on screen. And I think it feels right because you're not actually noticing it. You're not feeling a distinction between departments. And I feel like when I feel a distinction between departments or between what I'm looking at, then surely things weren't really like gelling right in the prep period or the shooting period. So how do you go about working with a production designer? I feel like that's probably the most important person, the production designer, and then straight after that, hair and makeup and cinematography. But I don't know, you tell me, like, which HODs do you feel like you need to spend the most time with, and how do you create that relationship when you meet someone or work with someone that you haven't worked with before?
Well, in this case, like Flo and I got along beautiful, like just so well from the very beginning. She's so nice, and we're both just straightforward people, and we began to have a shorthand, and so she and I started working together because we were on the movie probably before hair and makeup were, but even while we were waiting to really start prep formally, we were all gathering research and sharing it with one another, and it was kind of like still in the pandemic, and a lot of people were working in their own homes, and instead of having meetings, we were creating albums together on the iPhone and sharing them, and that it actually ended up working out really beautifully because you could have shared albums, and it was the time where I felt technology really was enhancing the process. And then as we got deeper into it, there would be times where, when we were developing your outfit for Wallach's, I remember being in touch with Flo a lot about that because in the beginning, I really felt strongly it should be red. And then we kind of went on a couple of other tangents, but then we kind of circled back to the red, and we even camera tested a red very early on. And we talked about it, there being some elements of red in the set, but not a lot. It was sort of a backdrop and balloons primarily, and like a very beautiful vintage like panel of some sort. And then and nobody else at the party was in that color. And so that was continual, like, and sometimes we were rushing. So like she would send me texts, like I would say, what does the lobby of Jack's rap party look like? And she'd shoot me a text like, that's it. I was like, okay, I'm going to make the girlfriend's dress green. Like it literally was that fast. I think it worked really well. And I'm so glad that you felt that on set, because it was the only way to do this movie was to be sharing information, because it was definitely helpful for all of us, because I think Flo at the same time was helped by seeing what the costumes were going to be for certain sets that were coming in the future. And she was in on all the fitting photos. I mean, it was a big digital communication party.
Yeah.
So
and then and I love that, and it just feels like you exist in a world, like there's a world and the audience gets to see the world, as opposed to being like, oh, I saw a movie that had great lighting, or a movie that had great costume. It's the world that we got immersed in, and that only happens, I think, when departments are working so closely together and on the same page. So I think it makes all the difference in the world. And of course, you have to be a lovely, kind, wonderful, collaborative person like you, and like Flo, and like Heber and Jamie and Linus, and all the people that our amazing HODs are so collaborative. So thank God that was possible. I wanted to go back for a second. You mentioned the red outfit, the scarf outfit. And I feel like I'm driving around LA and I'm seeing it on billboards, and I'm seeing it like it's just so crazy. I feel like sometimes when we're in that little room and we're wrapping a scarf around me and we're saying this and we're talking about that, it's like you forget that one day millions of people are going to see what you do. And I feel like that about acting as well. Like I'll do a take never thinking, oh, I'm going to have to answer for the way I've just done this take. Like I'm never going to have to do an interview and explain why I made that choice. It's just, I forget that everyone's going to see it one day. But that red outfit is getting already a lot of, airtime out there in the world, which is incredible, because it's one that feels so right to Nellie, to me. And I was so grateful that you were so collaborative with me beyond your HODs. You were collaborative with me in that process about, what do you think Nellie would wear? And what do you think of this? And I remember like red was the first color I said, Nellie's color is red. Like she's fire, she's fiery, passionate, like red. It's bold, it's in your face. It's love and passion, but it can be anger and fire. That is Nellie. And so of course, if you had shown me an outfit that was blue and amazing, I would have been like, great, let's do the amazing blue outfit, which incidentally we did in the later scene. But it was kind of, funny that it did pan out being the red outfit. And I remember too, getting to tell you about like the movement classes that I was doing and telling you, okay, so I'm doing animal work and Nellie is in this scene a honey badger, but in this scene she's an octopus. And you giving me that scarf to use literally as a tentacle, like that changed how I did the dancing. It changed how I felt. It changed how I could move and use this as an extra limb and be in my octopus and do the movement. And the hair too, like Jamie, when we're deciding between short hair, long hair, I was like, I need tentacles. I need the long hair is actually great. So I loved getting to do that process. But speaking of that process, beyond working with HODs, with actors, do you normally find it helpful or a bit of a hindrance? Do you sometimes have an actor come in and be like, I want to do this, and you're like, oh, that really doesn't work with everything else I had in mind? Or is it you just always can adapt and find it helpful somehow?
I'm just going to gush about you for a minute. Like, I found you to be incredibly collaborative and so intuitive about your character, and also about the motivations behind your character, and also what you were, what you needed. And I love the animal I don't know if it's a metaphor, but I became so attached to that idea of yours that it just made the whole character fall into place for me. And but it was lovely to have you worked your butt off in prep too, because you were at dance rehearsal, I remember 4 days a week. And then once or twice a week, you'd pop over to the costume shop and we would watch the dance rehearsal develop. We could see the dance develop, and the collaboration was magic to me. Like, I love it when an actor is so in tune and brings me ideas that I may not have thought of, and then it makes me look good, and it's just like, it's this beautiful symbiosis. And I found that our fittings were awesome. Like, I loved our fittings so much.
I'm Manuel.
I heard you. Oh, I didn't need your help.
I know.
Nope.
Believe her?
Why not?
She's kind of a big star.
Well, in 30 years, she won't be a big star anymore. She can tell her grandkids Nellie Leroy once used her name. Besides, I'm already a star.
Huh. You are?
Yeah.
What have you been in?
Nothing yet.
Who's your contract with?
Don't have one.
Okay, I think you want to become a star.
Honey, you don't become a star. You either are one or you ain't. I am.
Well, speaking of iconic looks, this year I didn't actually get to dress up for Halloween, but I was going to dress as the dude from The Big Lebowski. And I remembered, because I was like, what do I want to dress as? And I was like, oh, if I go as the dude, great outfit, iconic outfit, immediately recognizable, and then I can drink a White Russian all night. But I remember on your Team Deacons podcast episode, listening to how, when you're talking about when Jeff Bridges came in and he was like, I want to be wearing this, or blah, blah, blah. And you guys came up with, it felt like such an organic way to find something that ended up being so recognizable and so iconic. But like you just said, it wasn't forced. You guys didn't force it, like, okay, let's come up with an iconic look. It's something that evolved, which is,
well, it was the dude,
awesome.
Right? It was because it was written on the page. And so, that's why I love working with Damien and the Coens, is that they write their own material. And then they are directing it. And so it is in them so thoroughly that they can answer any question, and they know intuitively when something is right. And sometimes even when you don't know it's right, but traditionally, like, usually it's like, I know it's right, they know it's right, because we understand the script, and I understand the script because it's so beautifully written. And yeah. But I remember you went as True Romance the year before, right?
The year before, and you helped me with my costume.
Yeah.
The benefit of working with all these costume designers. Exactly. Oh my God.
So what did you end up doing? What did you end up going as?
This year I didn't actually end up dressing up because Tom and I went on the Orient Express instead, and you have to wear black tie to dinner and stuff like that. It was amazing. It was so good. But I digress. Has it gotten more difficult? You know how, like, say if I was a spark, for example, like I work in the electric department sort of thing. I feel like with how technology is changing, what I would have learned 10 years ago would already be so different to the equipment I would be using, or a grip or whatever, like equipment changes and processes evolve. Is that the case for costume design? Do you feel like it feels like almost that you guys lean into the old school methods kind of more than any of the other departments, like hand making a hat? Very few people can probably do that anymore, or hand making gloves and hand stitching leather, whatever it is. I feel like those old school methods must be more difficult to seek out, surely. And on the flip side, are there other technological kind of evolutions that have just, aside from the photo sharing sort of research part, are there any other ways that the costume world has evolved, do you think?
I think, like, on other shows that weren't trying to recreate the 1920s, there are a lot of things that they use now that, you can print fabric. So you can create if you come up with a print that doesn't exist, you can have it printed by a computer generated. But on this movie, I stuck with techniques that were used in the 1920s. And so that, yes, we had gloves made, like Lady Faye's gloves were made. We had another pair of gloves made. I can't remember. All the hats that Eleanor wears were all handmade, and they were made by a milliner, which we were basing her like a combination of like Luella Parsons and Eleanor Glynn. And Eleanor Glynn was somebody who was very popular in like the earlier part of the 20s and late teens. And I feel like that's how I approached Jean, was like, she hit her, like, she was in her prime about, this sounds terrible, but like, she was like a younger woman 20 years ago, and this was her look, and that works for her, and she still wears it to this day. And that was kind of the approach that I took with her. But it's very like an eccentric approach, because she wants to be noticed as much as the movie stars do. But all of the things she wore were like her dresses, they were all handmade, hand beaded. Like the hats were handmade, and Manny's shoes were handmade, and all the beading and the stitching and it was all done by artisans that were still doing that craft in Los Angeles, and they're getting fewer and fewer and fewer and harder to find. The tailors were as into it as I was. They were into these details because for them it was fun. They hadn't really, all of them have made period suits, but like they loved doing it and like creating it. They were into it as much as I was, which was really fun. And so were, like I said, there's a cobbler, the shoemaker. He loved making Manny's. Like, he just like coveted those shoes. They were perforated wingtips out of like this beautiful leather. And, he has big feet, Diego. we had to make
He's
his
a tall
shoes.
guy.
And, he's tall, right. And he's tall. We had to make his suits. But the same tailor that we went to for Irving Thalberg, who's Max Mangella, that's who, it's just like, this is how deep I went. Like, Manny goes to his suit maker. And so it's the same tailor. And he's like, okay, I'm a studio head now. I'm going to go to the same tailor. And they literally made, yeah. And I don't know. I knew it made me feel better. I don't know if the audience, but I feel like there's those little touches that you can sense, like, all those pink raincoats were, done by a tailor, and all the hats were done by hand. But I felt like the hewn quality, that's what I wanted. Like, I wanted you to feel the hand in some of those costumes. And so I went old school. But I did, like, a long time ago, I did sort of a superhero thing, and I did the technique where you print onto like this super stretch, and what's usually a flat fabric, and the printing allows you to create texture, which is better for film. So I have used sort of more modern techniques on other films, but not on this one. And trying to think if we even embroidered, we had it done by hand, and the beading we had done by hand. And
I honestly think where you started out gave you this knack for being resourceful and thrifty and all this stuff. And no doubt working on, like, Coen Brother film or whatever, like you are so the perfect designer for this job. It's insane to me.
Oh, thank you.
I
did,
like,
you know, and the Coens are always like, we never have enough money on their movies. And so I think
bet.
I'm really used to not having these grand ambitions and not having enough money.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes you can do your best work because you're not like, you don't have all the money in the world, and the money's, you can't really like, you have
sometimes
to be decisive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Parameters
Yeah.
sometimes I think breed like the best creative decisions. Like I remember on I, Tonya, we had no money for anything. It was, you know, ambitious too, but at a small scale. The whole filming technique was dictated by the fact that we couldn't afford a jib arm or a crane on any, like all the days. So we got our cameraman, said he could ice skate. He got on the ice, said I played ice hockey back in the day. Let's see what it looks like on the ice. That whole shooting style completely shifted to this more visceral. In it, you could see like the grit, the force, the brutality of it. Like it was just so much more muscular, which her skating style was, because you could see it up close. And when you see ice skating on TV from far away, these long lens shots, it looks beautiful and graceful. And that was not Tonya's skating style. So not only did it work better for the film, it was much less expensive, but we never would have come to that conclusion necessarily without having those kind of budget restrictions. So I agree. Sometimes sometimes those boundaries are the things that like bear those creative choices in the most beautiful way. I had another question.
That's so interesting about the cameraman. God, I love that story.
By the way, like the Ginger Rogers quote of like, yeah, everything he did, I did backwards in heels. I'm like, everything I did, he did on backwards on ice holding a camera. Like he was
wow,
incredible. So, but I had another question, kind of like a fun one.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any movie, you know how you mentioned like, okay, you watched Truffaut's film about filmmaking and it got your head spinning about filmmaking. Is there any movie where like the costumes have just always stood out to you? Like you're like, in that movie, the costumes are the star of the show. Like do you have that movie for you?
Damien gave us a list of silent films, but the one silent film that I watched in that film class, and I have looked at there's like 4 sections of it, is Intolerance. And that I watched. I've always been moved by the way, like you can see the craft on the cam, you know, in camera, like, oh, look, they cut felt and then they hand sewed it. And like, I just loved how their interpretation of research and what they were trying to portray with, there's something so, it's naive and beautiful and so beautifully crafted at the same time that I love that. And I channeled that movie for sure when I was doing this. But in like Singing in the Rain is one of my favorite movies of all time. And there's something that is just so playful about, and I love Gene Kelly's clothes in that movie. And but
his outfit he wears in the first premiere, I love it. It's so good.
I love it. And then, you know, well, we use kind of Nellie's, for Nellie, we use that dress. But I think, is there one movie, I can't think of a single movie that I think is like, oh, but I do love the costumes in like a gazillion different movies. Like Rear Window, I could watch that movie. I think Grace Kelly's clothes in Rear Window are to die for. And like, I love them. And I love Chinatown and All the President's Men. I appreciate like the contemporary, like I could watch that movie no matter when. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I love watching movies from the 70s. Actually, I find them like, I think that was one of the best times of American cinema. But I don't have a single movie though that I'm like, oh, I just like, I'm inspired by films. I love watching movies, and I feel like that's why I do what I do, is because I love movies. It's not that I love clothes, but I love movies more, I think. And I feel like I'm so like, good. I like to that, I think I mentioned it before, like taking something that's written on the page and turning it into 3-dimension and then having it out there in the universe for people to enjoy, I think is such a amazing job, you know, for all of us to do, right? It's like, it's pretty incredible.
You said that so perfectly. I love clothes, but I love movies more. I feel the same way. I love acting, but I love movies more than anything. If someone took acting away from me, I would be devastated. No one could take movies away from me ever. And by the way, my answer to that question, the costumes that stand out to me, La Belle et la Bête, Jean Cocteau's La Belle et la Bête. The costumes in that movie have always to me been like,
That's
the
a good
beast
one.
wears like this insane, like these shoulders and like it's just the most amazing costumes, I think.
That's a beautiful, yes, it is amazing. But you know, if
And
I start
reflection.
listing them, there's too many. But
No,
that's a beautiful one.
I feel like what we didn't get to talk about Damien enough, and I just like he just
Let's
clearly
gush about him just for a second.
Just for a second, like
Yeah.
he is, I think, a generational talent. He's an auteur. He's one of those directors that I personally would follow anywhere. And this movie, he is swinging for the fences. It was like he was told he'll never get to make a movie again, so he gave this movie everything. How do you feel?
I feel exactly the same way, and I would follow him down any bridge he went. And I feel like he's one of the most inspiring directors I've ever worked with, or and his vision and the way he communicates with his crew, and he's just so clear and inspiring because he works as hard or harder than anyone on the film. And he's just like a great leader, and he is expressive to all of the people, from department heads to the crew, like of what he's trying to accomplish. And there aren't many people like them, and I think he is singular in his generation of filmmakers, and I don't think there's anybody like him that's that's a born, like he's so young.
I know.
I remember the first time I worked with him, he was born like he was anyway. It's amazing.
How old was he the first time you worked with him? He would have been,
I want to say he's like 30.
Wow.
He was 30 when he directed La La Land.
That's so crazy. He could stop now and be remembered forever, I think, but hopefully he's not going to. Now, last of all, just hit us with just blow everyone's minds. How many costumes? How many people did you dress? How many? Like, give me those crazy numbers for Babylon, because I know the numbers were crazy.
I think it was between, like, I want to say, but there were, the Day Out of Days had somewhere like 175 to 200 actors, right? Speaking parts. And 1 through 20, you and Brad had like 35 changes. Lily had 20, and Manny had 20, 15 to 20. Anyway, there were a lot. I don't know. Someone did do a count, like, or someone on my crew, and they think it was around 7,000 costumes, 7,000 or 8,000. And that battle scene really is what brought it up. The battle was crazy. Do you remember you came and visited the battle?
I'll never forget that day on set for the rest of my life. And I wasn't even called in that day. I just had to be there. It's insane. We'll never see 700 extras on a set again, I don't think. I mean, talk about intolerance. Talk about D.W. Griffith going for it, like big. This is big.
No CGI. And there was one day where there were 900 people there.
Yeah,
it was a lot. So it was there was a lot of costumes, and I feel like, I am obsessed, and I dressed a lot of the background, and certainly all of the principals were, and it was, you can't do a movie like that without being completely obsessed. I was like possessed. Like, I was dreaming it and like thinking about it constantly. I was cray. And then like it was over, and I was like, okay, that was that. And here we go. Like,
it's so true. Like, Babylon finished, and I was like, I feel like I had a hangover for 6 months. Like, like you said before, like Paramount giving this a green light. Yeah, that we didn't necessarily have the budget we had, but the fact that a studio agreed to make the movie, agreed to shoot it on film, and let us just do it is kind of amazing. And I'm really grateful for the studio to have done that too. So me too.
Hats off to Paramount.
Like, seriously, like, you can talk the talk, but they walk the walk. The fact that they greenlit and paid for this movie is just, in this day and age, madness, and we might not ever see it again, sadly, quite the same way. So I'm soaking up every second of this moment now, because it's big. Babylon.
Well, congratulations. And it was such a pleasure to work with you, and it's wonderful to see you today. I adore you, and I gush about you all the time.
So do I. This has been The Process, and you've been with Mary Zophres, and I'm Margot Robbie, and we've had so much fun having this conversation. And if you want to see this all in the big screen glory, go see Babylon.